I was microwaving my sad little lunch, half-wilted spinach, and whatever passed for chicken at the cafeteria, when I heard laughter down the hall. The kind of laughter that made your skin itch. That fake, performative, we're rich and important kind of laugh. I leaned just far enough to see through the glass walls of the executive suite, and there they were. Miles Granger in all his smug J. Crew catalog glory spinning in my chair, feet up on my desk, and his father, the CEO, clapping him on the back like he'd just discovered penicillin. "That space has better light. I'll take it," Miles said, pointing right at my corner office like it was a goddamn beach cabana and not the place I'd spent 7 years turning into the silent control tower of Pendrix Systems. His father just chuckled. "Sure, why not? She won't mind." I didn't flinch, didn't storm in or make a scene. I just stared through the glass, watched Miles flip through a report I'd written last quarter like it was some IKEA assembly manual, and quietly tossed my fork into the trash. The CEO caught my eye as I passed, didn't wave, didn't blink, just turned away and started talking about flights to Aspen. If you're already gritting your teeth, take 2 seconds and hit the subscribe button and like the video, because apparently 97% of people hear stories like mine and forget to support the team that brings them. And trust me, this one, you'll want to hear how it ends. Anyway, no warning, no conversation, just a lime green post-it stuck to my monitor the next morning. "We've reassigned you to a hybrid schedule, effective immediately." No signature, no HR memo, just a thinly veiled eviction notice. I sat there for a few minutes, long enough to watch Miles walk in with a pumpkin cream cold brew, give me a finger gun salute like some cheesy TikTok finance bro, and toss his North Face backpack into the chair I'd practically lived in for a decade. So I packed one box. No fanfare, no tears. Took down the Polaroid of my dog, unplugged my dual monitor, left the procurement binders on the shelf. He wouldn't know what to do with them anyway, and walked out. What no one at Pendrix realized, not Miles, not his father, not a single person in legal, was that my office wasn't just a space with decent light and a west-facing window. That room was the gateway node for every active vendor we had under NDA, every compliance audit trail we were set to renew this quarter, and every real-time governance tool integrated through our SaaS backbone. And here's the kicker. It wasn't even owned by Pendrix. 4 years ago, when our vendor risk systems were crumbling under a rushed acquisition spree, I proposed an external fix. I'd run the whole compliance backbone through my LLC, Core Sentry Group. More agile, better audit coverage, fewer internal bottlenecks. They approved it in 2 meetings and gave me full autonomy. Why? Because no one else wanted to deal with the licensing nightmares and regulator workflows. They were happy to throw it at the infrastructure lady and forget about it. So when I left that room, I didn't just leave a chair and desk. I left behind the access node to a fully integrated compliance shell leased through Core Sentry, personally encrypted, personally managed, and very much not part of Pendrix's direct infrastructure. Miles didn't know any of that. He just wanted the view. They saw a quiet woman in a quiet role and thought I'd just sit quietly somewhere else. But the thing about infrastructure is this. When you unplug the wrong terminal, the whole damn system starts to sweat. And by day 3, they were already sweating. The day after Miles took my office like he was claiming a hotel upgrade, I started working from home. Permanently. There was no grand goodbye, no dramatic standoff with HR, just the quiet click of my monitor powering down and the sound of his Bluetooth speaker crackling to life as I left. He was already playing lo-fi beats like he thought he'd invented productivity. The sticky note still sat on my desk when I left. No header, no explanation. Just a scribbled, "You've been reassigned to hybrid, effective immediately." Like someone was embarrassed to own the decision, but not enough to actually not do it. That's how they operate at Pendrix. If you're loud and mediocre with a famous last name, you get a title. If you're quiet and essential, you get moved like furniture. I drove home in silence, didn't even turn the radio on. Just let the hum of the highway remind me that nobody there really understood how fragile their systems were, or how much they leaned on the invisible hands keeping it all propped up. By the time I reached my condo, I'd already spun up the backup node. See, when I first pitched Core Sentry 4 years ago, I didn't just offer them a service, I offered them resilience. Every active vendor relationship, ISO compliance logs, SOCU exports, third-party licensing renewals, even the ethics hotline routing, all piped through a managed terminal hosted on-site at Pendrix. That terminal was mine. The software stack? Mine. The encryption keys? Registered to Core Sentry's private trust. Sure, they paid the monthly retainer, but the legal agreement was crystal clear. The node couldn't be moved, reassigned, or altered without written consent from both parties. And guess who they never consulted when Miles decided he liked my west-facing window better than his startup cave across the hall? They thought hybrid meant I'd float back and forth like a consultant on call. They didn't realize I'd left. On Thursday, a junior from Ops pinged me. "Hey, quick Q, do you know why the vendor console isn't loading?" I ignored it. A couple hours later, the same kid dropped a follow-up. "Miles asked if you could shoot over the new compliance certs. We need them for the quarterly update." I didn't respond, because there was no new cert. The export workflow they were looking for was tied directly to the Core Sentry console, encrypted, scheduled, and terminal triggered from the node they disconnected. The moment I left that office, they kicked the plug out of their own ventilation system. Quietly, unknowingly, and now they were standing there wheezing, trying to figure out why the air smelled like smoke. At 5:47 p.m., the CEO emailed me directly. Subject: quick favor. Hi, Miles mentioned some hiccups accessing your former setup. Can we get credential access to the workstation? Appreciate the help. I stared at it for a moment, then typed exactly one sentence. That workstation is not Pendrix property. It's a Core Sentry Group asset, as per our licensing agreement. No smiley face, no softening language, just the truth. And then I logged off. No panic, no rage, just silence. Because I'd already rerouted the control stream to my home server. Same handshake, same logs, same oversight. Just no access for them. Unless, of course, they wanted to sit down, pull up the contract, and start taking things seriously. But we both knew they wouldn't. Not yet. They still thought I was bluffing. They still thought this was about an office. By the third day, the houseplants in my home office looked healthier than the executive team at Pendrix. It started with a lazy little Slack message from Corey in Ops. He was one of the only ones who ever treated me like more than a button pusher. His message popped up at 11:42 a.m. "Hey, quick Q, can you re-enable the vendor console? Miles says he can't find the compliance logs anywhere. Maybe the old system needs a refresh." I read it twice. Once for the words, once for the insult. Old system. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? Sure, let me just give access to a console I built, licensed and secured under a private entity you all stopped respecting the second nepotism walked through the door. Right. I wasn't their intern. I wasn't their IT girl. I was the infrastructure spine they just tried to yank out of a living system, and now they were surprised it wasn't walking anymore. At 2:30 p.m., the SOC2 pipeline failed. I know that because it pinged me, not them. At 3:07, someone from legal opened the Core Sentry agreement in our shared Dropbox folder. I still had notifications turned on. At 4:18, Miles posted a very professional heads up in the compliance channel, saying they were tweaking internal cert flows due to some legacy issues. Legacy issues. God help me. And then, at 5:47 p.m., the CEO finally emailed me. Subject line: Access request body. Hi, Miles mentioned there is a connection to your old terminal that's preventing some access. Could we please get workstation credentials for the audit workflow? Thanks for your support. No hello, no hope you're doing well. Just that flat, sterile corporate tone they use when they still think they're in charge. I replied 5 minutes later. Hi, the workstation in question is not Pendrix property. It is a Core Sentry Group interface governed under the vendor hosting provisions in our agreement. All requests for access or modification must be submitted through the authorized Core Sentry vendor liaison process, as outlined in Exhibit D Best. My name. And then I shut the laptop, made myself tea, let the sound of nothing at all fill the room, because that reply wasn't just an email, it was a mirror, held right up to their smug, careless faces. For the first time, they had to see it. I wasn't part of the machine. I was the machine, and they'd kicked me out of the building thinking I'd leave my power behind. They had no idea how deep the system ran through me. Every vendor token, every cert rotation, every encrypted socket routing through third-party compliance logs, they all lived in Core Sentry's sealed framework. My framework. Not some plug-and-play IT panel they could slap a password reset on. And now their entire pipeline was quiet, not broken, just unreachable. I imagined Miles sitting in that office, jabbing at a frozen dashboard, wondering why no report exports were coming through. Maybe even tapping the monitor like that would do something. He probably thought the system needed a reboot. What it needed was me, but I was gone, not fired, not even angry, just done. They gave my chair away like it meant nothing. Now they were starting to understand what came with it. 4 years ago, Pendrix was drowning in red flags. Vendor compliance was collapsing under the weight of its own neglect. Failed audits, expired certs, unreadable data trails. The board wanted faster turnarounds. Legal wanted less liability. And the execs? They just wanted someone else to deal with it. So I raised my hand. Not to save them, but to build something they couldn't screw up without screwing me over first. I proposed a complete restructure. We'd outsource infrastructure compliance through my LLC, Core Sentry Group, so Pendrix could stay agile without risking non-compliance fines. I'd handle third-party licensing, firewall integration, and audit stream continuity. They'd retain a clean vendor agreement, and I'd retain legal authority over the control node. Legal skimmed the packet, gave it the standard green light, and filed it without a second glance. The CEO signed it himself, after joking, as long as it keeps the auditors off my back. And it did. Core Sentry ran quietly in the background for 4 solid years. Never a failed review, never a missing export. The terminal in my office, that slick little workstation they thought was just a desk ornament, was the gateway, not a gateway. The gateway. Every flagged audit routed through that node. Every vendor handshake passed through Core Sentry's encryption key, tied to that specific hardware stack in that specific location. And in the middle of all of it, Section 5.3b, tucked halfway through the vendor hosting agreement. Not bolded, not italicized, just sitting there, waiting. Physical relocation of the access node constitutes breach unless authorized in writing by vendor. Simple sentence, massive consequence, and no one had ever bothered to read past the signature page. I mean, why would they? It was my contract, my software, my responsibility. All they had to do was let me sit in that damn room and keep the lights on. But then Miles came in and decided he wanted better lighting, and the CEO, playing Daddy Warbucks, let him have it, never thinking that office wasn't just a perk. It was an infrastructure linchpin. The moment I was reassigned, that clause triggered. Technically, it gave them 10 days to notify Core Sentry and submit a relocation request. But since I wasn't notified at all, no email, no form, just that passive-aggressive sticky note, the window closed before they even realized it was open. And now, every day they stalled, the breach fee quietly accrued. Penalties, audit delays, service interruption fines, all outlined clearly in Appendix C, another section they skipped. I had a feeling legal was starting to get cozy with that document, page by painful page. Meanwhile, Miles kept pacing the office, watching his dashboards load blank and yelling at people to reboot the tunnel interface, which, of course, wasn't even in the building anymore. I pictured him trying to access vendor logs through a front-end shell that only existed because I maintained it. Like he thought data would just start flowing again if he stared hard enough. Poor thing didn't know the access node had geo-locking enabled. Even if he cloned the setup, the system would reject it unless I approved the new physical signature location myself, which I wouldn't. I'd built Core Sentry for one reason, to work flawlessly, securely, and on my terms, and they'd broken all 3. They thought they'd shuffled a staffer to hybrid. What they actually did was breach a vendor contract, forfeit operational access, and start a countdown on a compliance disaster, all for a better view. By day 5, the cracks weren't subtle anymore. Pendrix systems ran on appearances, polished emails, inflated job titles, staged collaboration photos in front of whiteboards no one had written on since Q2. But under all that was a pulsing, twitchy backend tied together with more vendor integrations than any of them could keep straight. And guess who held the keys to every one of those? Not the chief growth strategist, currently Googling what an SSL cert did from my old chair. The first red flag was the SOC2 export. It was due Tuesday morning, routine, automated, timed down to the second, but it didn't fire. Miles sent a chipper Slack to ops. Any idea why our export hasn't hit the NAS folder yet? Might just need a restart. It wasn't a restart. The automated export depended on a pre-authenticated trigger that ran through the core console, a trigger that only activated from one specific IP, the one they disconnected when they evicted me. Then came the vendor attestation reports. Pendrix had 8 high-risk vendors, all of which required monthly compliance verifications. Normally, one click in the console and Core Sentry pulled live attestations from each vendor's compliance node. Seamless, auditable, verified. Now, that console might as well have been a blank Word doc. Even the internal ethics hotline, the one Pendrix loved touting on their About page, was down. It used to route through a secure iframe hosted by my LLC's cloud environment. But without the right key exchange, it defaulted to a generic dead-end redirect. Someone from HR filed a ticket because all they saw was a gray box that said, "This resource is no longer available." By Thursday, the Slack channel for IT emergencies only was lit up like Times Square. One engineer posted, "Anyone else seeing network failures when trying to reach the audit log portal?" Another chimed in, "Core console isn't accepting credentials. Can't even ping the old node." And then, because panic always finds the most clueless person to follow, Miles authorized a full system refresh, wiped cached credentials, reset VPN priorities, tried to re-establish admin rights to a shell he didn't understand. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum at the controls of a 747. The IT team didn't even bother sugarcoating the report. Primary finding: Core console fails to resolve. Vendor tunnel is off-grid. IP key does not match authorized interface. Status: unrecoverable without vendor intervention. That's when the calls started. Legal pinged me 3 times. No subject, no body, just "call me ASAP." The CFO left a voicemail. She sounded calm, but I could hear the clink of a wine glass in the background, like she was trying to slow the free fall with Cabernet and crossed fingers. They still hadn't figured it out. The tunnel didn't go down. They unplugged it. And now, the entire company was gasping through a severed pipeline, trying to duct tape together dashboards that depended on credentials no longer valid, systems no longer authorized, workflows no longer reachable. All of it, every failure, every blank screen, every dead link, traced back to one decision. Miles wanted a nicer view. And for that, Pendrix lost its operational lungs. They thought I'd just keep the system alive out of loyalty, but loyalty is earned, and they cashed theirs in for a corner office. By Monday morning, the word audit had finally clawed its way into the boardroom. Regulatory review was scheduled in less than 2 weeks. Nothing exotic, just a standard third-party compliance inspection tied to the vendor stack we'd scaled over the last 4 years. Under normal conditions, Core Sentry's system handled it automatically. We'd built redundancies into every export cycle, fail-safes, real-time verification flags. But with the primary node severed and no credentials authorized for re-entry, Pendrix had just 2 options: fix it or face penalties. And fix it was no longer on the table. At 9:18 a.m., legal requested an internal review, not a memo. A review, as in multiple partners from the external counsel office were looped in. One of them printed out the Core Sentry contract and began highlighting clauses like their life depended on it. The CEO, always the picture of control, paced the conference room barefoot, holding his shoes like a toddler at daycare. "Can't we just reassign access?" he asked, trying to sound confident, like this was a matter of resetting a Netflix password. One of the senior legal analysts didn't even look up. "Only the vendor of record can initiate credential transfer." The CEO paused. "Well, then let's just contact her." Legal still didn't look up. We passed the breach threshold on Thursday. That was the moment the CFO's pen slipped out of her hand. "Wait, what threshold?" she asked, suddenly stiff. Section 7.2 of the Core Sentry Agreement. In the event of unsanctioned hardware relocation or administrative override, a 10-10 calendar day grace period shall be provided to remedy breach through mutual written consent. Failure to secure consent triggers penalty enforcement as defined in Schedule D. 10 days, not business days, calendar days. The CEO ran a hand through his thinning hair. Well, we've still got time, right? Legal finally looked up. No. The clock started when her access node was reassigned. That was last Friday morning. As of 9:01 a.m. today, we're in penalty. You could hear the boardroom suck the air out of the hallway. At 2:08 p.m., the board convened in an emergency session. Miles wasn't invited. Instead, the director of operations gave a grim presentation walking through the fallout. 4 incomplete audit trails, 2 non-compliant vendor renewals, and a stalled SOC2 export already flagged by a partner. Each slide ended the same way. Root cause, no displacement. The final slide was a scanned copy of Section 5.3b, the breach clause, enlarged, highlighted. The CEO tried to wave it off. This is just procedural. She'll come back once we offer her something better. But the board wasn't nodding, because what Miles had done wasn't a policy error, it was a contractual landmine, and they'd skipped right into it with the grace of a drunk parade. The CFO closed her binder slowly. Who approved the office reassignment? Silence. The CEO tried to speak, then stopped. His hand hovered in the air like a man mid-sneeze. Eventually, he whispered, "It was casual. We didn't go through channels." Of course they didn't. Because for them, I'd never been a vendor. I was just the woman who handled the compliance stuff. The one who didn't speak over people in meetings. The one who didn't demand equity. Who didn't post wins on LinkedIn or lobby for VP titles. They didn't see me. Not when I rebuilt their compliance backbone. Not when I routed a dying audit pipeline through a custom framework. And definitely not when they gave my office to the CEO's son without so much as a conversation. But now they saw the contract. Now they saw me, not as an employee, not as a problem, but as the authority they no longer controlled. The first call came at 7:41 a.m. I let it ring until it died in silence. No voicemail. The second came at 8:12. Miles again. This time, he left one. His voice sounded like someone trying to balance charm with desperation. Like maybe if he said collaborate enough times, I'd forget I had a lawyer. Hey, just wanted to, touch base? Think maybe we got some wires crossed with the whole office thing. Totally my bad. Just trying to get things running smooth again. Give me a ring back, yeah? He sounded like a man still convinced this was about a parking space. The third call came at 9:03, short. No message. Then, finally, at 9:45, the CEO sent an email. Subject: Let's reconnect body. We may have misunderstood some of the terms regarding the core Sentry framework. It would be helpful to realign and ensure mutual value. Happy to schedule a time to reconnect and find a collaborative path forward. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my attorney. She'd been waiting. By noon, her response was delivered directly to the board's legal team, with a CC to the CEO and CFO. I never saw the CEO's face when he opened the PDF, but I like to imagine it was a slow collapse. The kind where you reread the same line 3 times and still hope it doesn't say what you think it says. Excerpt from the response. In accordance with Clause 7.2 and Schedule D of the Core Sentry Vendor Agreement, the penalty for breach due to unauthorized node displacement has triggered. Based on the contract's defined retroactivity and daily rate accrual, the current outstanding liability as of today totals $6.2 million. There was no wiggle room. No apology clause, no oops, didn't realize your desk had a compliance nuke under it clause. Just $6.2 million. Locked in, retroactive, enforceable. By 3 p.m., the board had voted. Miles was placed on immediate suspension pending a full internal review. Word trickled down through the building like water under a door. A few people tried texting me. Hey, what's going on with Miles? Is it true? You okay? I didn't answer those either. The next morning, the CEO reached out again. Not with bluster this time. No fake warmth, just a clean, neutered message. Would you be open to a collaborative return under revised terms as a way to repair the relationship and rebuild confidence? He called it collaborative. I knew what it really was. They wanted the damage to stop. They wanted the penalty clock to freeze, the audit logs to regenerate, the systems to come back to life before their Q4 funding round turned into a postmortem. And here's the thing, I didn't hate them for it. They were doing what desperate executives always do, reaching out just far enough to seem humble without actually giving up control. They wanted me in the building again, just not in charge of anything. But that ship had sailed, and I wasn't coming back to be the quiet woman in the corner again. My attorney replied with a single line, "At this time, Ms. Keller is not exploring reintegration." No anger, no gloating, just structured refusal. They had handed my office to a man who didn't know the difference between a VPN tunnel and a Slack thread. Now they wanted my signature. They'd have to settle for my silence. 3 weeks later, they finally gave up pretending. The board signed off on a reinstatement contract. Quietly, no announcement. Core Sentry was now classified as an off-site critical vendor, slotted neatly between their cloud disaster recovery team and the cybersecurity firm they only called after a breach. My LLC had moved from internal weirdness to external necessity. On paper, I was no longer a former employee. I was infrastructure. The new contract was clean, tight, enforceable. Everything the old one was, only now they knew exactly what each clause meant, especially the one legal carved into stone. Core Sentry's primary node shall remain in its original configuration. Physical access, modifications, or relocation must be authorized through dual-signed vendor consent. Translation: don't touch it, don't move it, don't even breathe on it unless you want another lawsuit. Meanwhile, the office, the one with the view Miles liked, sat empty. The glass door still had smudges from his last day in it. The screen on the old workstation blinked in silent standby, waiting for a key that wasn't coming. They didn't assign it to anyone else. They couldn't. HR floated the idea of repurposing it into a guest space. Legal shot it down before the memo left draft. Facilities suggested removing the nameplate. Someone from comms asked if they should at least box up my old folders. No one touched a thing. Eventually, legal ordered the door locked entirely. Not repainted, not rebranded, just locked. People started calling it the room, as if naming it might wake something up again. I never went back, not out of spite, out of principle. The systems were running again. The audit logs flowed. SOC2 had been patched, vendor attestations restored. Even the ethics iframe was live again. The console pinged my server like nothing had happened. On the outside, Pendrix was operational. But the relationship? Dead. They didn't apologize, they revised. They didn't invite me back, they signed a contract. And I was fine with that. I never changed the access key, never removed the files, never even rebooted the node. Because some things don't need to be dismantled to make a point. Some just need to be left exactly where they were, untouched, unacknowledged, and unrepairable. Every time someone passed that office, they saw the cost of arrogance. And every time their system breathed cleanly again, they remembered who built its lungs. I didn't need the nameplate. The silence was loud enough. Every Tuesday at 2 a.m. sharp, the console in my home office lights up. Just once. No alerts, no buzzing, no dramatic sound effect. Just a quiet flicker as Core Sentry's encrypted process initiates its scheduled handshake with the Pendrix servers. A single line scrolls across the log. Credential confirmed. Audit stream active. That's it. No meetings, no Slack threads, no smug middle managers trying to explain things they don't understand. Just quiet, precise continuity, signed, certified, and routed from a machine miles away from the office I no longer step foot in, and every week they rely on that handshake. It's not optional, not replaceable, not something a new hire can Google their way around. The system runs because I allow it to. That line, audit stream active, is the sound of a company still breathing because I didn't pull the plug. They never made an announcement when Core Sentry was reinstated, never issued an apology. The CEO quietly stepped back from day-to-day operations. Miles is still under review. Last I heard, he was attending a strategic leadership workshop in Scottsdale and posting heavily filtered photos of airport lounges like he's finding himself. The new head of compliance has never spoken to me directly. She sends quarterly summaries through legal channels. All of them are cordial, polished, carefully non-personal, but the subtext is always the same. We're still here. You're still here. Let's not break this again. I've thought about unplugging it, just once, just to feel what would happen on their end. The alarms, the scrambling, the CFO swearing into a silk tie. But I don't. Because this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about permanence. They tried to erase me, and instead, they embedded me. Now I live in the pulse of their system, not on their payroll, not on their org chart, but in every automated audit stream, in every successful compliance review, in every executive who hesitates before moving someone without reading the contract. They gave away my office. They lost control of everything that came with it. And every Tuesday at 2 watts a.m., the system reminds them, gently, mechanically, without fanfare, that I'm still here, not in the building, but exactly where I need to be.